You are tuned in to the LowBand Show, broadcasting from the storm drains under the big city, where a tunnel crew runs this booth on salvaged gear, pipes humming, steady water dripping, piping surface science and tech news on a low-band signal through the drains. I'm your host, Max Hertz. Welcome in. Here's what we do. We take real science and tech news from the surface, summarize it, then go deeper to educate, entertain, and shed light on what's in store for our collective future. News from the net, clear signal, and a little tunnel. If you came for hype, you took a wrong turn at the storm drain.
Welcome in. Good to have you with us today on the low-band signal. Wiz, good to have you in the booth today.
Good to be back in the booth, Max. Ready when you are.
Today, we're diving deep into global energy shifts with a look at a potential nuclear renaissance in Canada and new reactor loans in the U.S. We'll also examine Europe's rapid warming, China's new supercomputer speed record, and a U.S. bill proposing AI chip location tracking. Let's get into it. Here's the breakdown today. CBC News reports on June 22, 2026, that Canada has unveiled a national strategy to build up to 10 new nuclear reactors by 2040. This is a significant move towards doubling their electricity grid capacity, and it marks a potential new civilian nuclear renaissance. Wiz, what's your take?
A renaissance indeed, if you consider the scale. Energy Minister Tim Hodgson states there's no credible plan to double the grid or achieve a low-carbon economy without nuclear, or for Canada to become an energy superpower without leveraging this advantage.
For listeners who may not be familiar, Wiz, could you briefly explain what CBC News is in this context?
CBC News is the news division of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Canada's national public broadcaster. Their reporting here outlines the strategic plan, which calls for construction on 2 large-scale reactors by 2035 and 5 more planned by 2040.
The strategy also targets at least 1 reactor outside Ontario by 2035 and a Canadian-made microreactor deployed to a remote community by the late 2030s. Currently, Canada has 4 nuclear plants, mostly in Ontario, generating about 15% of its electricity.
A Canadian-made microreactor for remote communities is an interesting detail. The plan is ambitious, aiming to bring small modular reactors online, with Saskatchewan also exploring mid-2030s deployment. This isn't just about raw power. It's also about a distinct distributed energy play.
Officials estimate construction of these new reactors could cost over $100 billion, with the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and Canada Growth Fund cited as possible funding sources. Hodgson also claimed the strategy could double the 90,000 jobs in Canada's nuclear sector.
$100 billion is a substantial investment, especially with could cost and possible funding sources doing heavy lifting. The job doubling claim, too, leans on future projections. It's an optimistic outlook with significant financial unknowns.
Beyond domestic build-out, the plan seeks to expand sales of CANDU reactors, aiming for at least 4 new international markets by 2040. The strategy explicitly notes these exports establish multi-decade partnerships, creating durable geopolitical and commercial relationships that advance Canada's broader foreign policy interests.
Reactor exports are a long game indeed. It's less about a quick sale and more about cementing Canada as a partner of choice in a complex global energy landscape. The strategic intent is clear: leverage energy for geopolitical influence.
The full realization of these plans, particularly the financial pathways, remains uncertain. We'll have to see how these projections unfold. The headline promises a lot for energy independence, but let's see what the details actually say. On June 23, 2026, the Trump administration announced a plan to provide $17.5 billion in loans for 10 new large nuclear reactors, aiming to meet skyrocketing power demand. Wiz, what's your initial reaction?
$17.5 billion for 10 new large reactors is a significant play, especially with tremendous interest from data center developers. It suggests a direct response to a very real power crunch.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright and other officials said Tuesday that the plants could begin construction by 2030, and become operational in the mid-2030s. Wright emphasized, "This is the start. We're going to move with the players that are ready to stand up and move quickly. Once that supply chain is up and running, do we think there will be dozens of these built going forward? I'd be very surprised if there were not."
The ambition is clear. They see this as the thin end of the wedge, aiming for dozens more. The mid-2030s operational target is aggressive for large-scale nuclear, but the enthusiasm is certainly present.
Most U.S. nuclear power plants were built between 1970 and 1990. Only 2 new large reactors have been built from scratch in the United States in recent decades. Those 2 reactors at Georgia Power Co.'s plant Vogtle were completed years late and billions of dollars over budget. The 10 new reactors will use the same design, Westinghouse's AP1000. For listeners who may not know, Wiz, what's the significance of Plant Vogtle's history here?
Plant Vogtle is the poster child for modern nuclear construction woes. Massive delays, huge cost overruns. It makes the robust and sound design claim for the AP1000 a testable hypothesis rather than a given, despite Wright citing bad planning, supply chain problems, and the COVID-19 pandemic as the culprits.
The long-term success and actual delivery of these ambitious plans remain uncertain, especially considering past challenges like those at Vogtle. We'll be watching as this unfolds. The headline promises a lot. Let's see what the report actually says. The AFP reported on June 22, 2026, that Europe is now the world's fastest warming continent, a significant and concerning trend. Wiz, what are your initial thoughts on this data?
That's a clear and immediate impact, and frankly, a bit sobering. The continent isn't just seeing heat waves, it's experiencing a sustained acceleration of warming, compounded by the Arctic's even faster heating. The red alerts underscore the real-world implications.
The latest heat wave sweeping across Europe is a stark reminder that it is the world's fastest warming continent, stretching into an Arctic that is heating at an even greater pace. Britain, France, Italy, and Spain have issued red alerts and health warnings for much of their territory this week, as the region endures its second heat episode since May.
A continent-wide red alert is certainly a stark reminder. This isn't just about a few hot days. It points to a deeper, accelerating thermal imbalance in the region. The impact on populations is immediate and widespread.
The planet as a whole is around 1.4 degrees Celsius warmer than in pre-industrial times. By comparison, Europe is around 2.4 degrees Celsius hotter, according to the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service. For listeners who may not know, Wiz, what is the Copernicus Climate Change Service?
The Copernicus Climate Change Service is the European Union's Earth Observation Program, offering open access data and information on climate change. Their analysis highlights how land masses, like Europe, warm more quickly than oceans, which can absorb more heat and cool through evaporation.
Shifts in atmospheric circulation have driven more frequent and more intense heat waves in the European summer. High-pressure systems, which bring settled weather and higher temperatures, have become more common in Europe. Another major reason is geography, as Europe is connected to the Arctic, which is 3.2 degrees Celsius warmer than in pre-industrial times. This is partly due to a process known as the albedo feedback.
Atmospheric changes mean Europe is increasingly under more persistent high-pressure systems, locking in those intense heat waves. And the Arctic connection creates a feedback loop. As bright snow and ice melt, they expose darker surfaces that absorb even more heat, accelerating regional warming further. It's a self-reinforcing cycle.
In other parts of Europe, areas where snow was very frequent in winter have seen this coverage shrink, exposing dark land. Stricter air quality regulations have also reduced aerosol emissions since the 1980s. But tackling that pollutant had the side effect of contributing to global warming, as these tiny airborne particles have a cooling effect by reflecting sunlight and making clouds more reflective.
That's a fascinating and complex unintended consequence. Improving air quality is crucial, but removing aerosols also removes their reflective cooling effect. It highlights the intricate balance of atmospheric chemistry and how interventions in one system can have cascading effects elsewhere. The full extent of this specific contribution is still being unraveled.
The precise interplay of all these factors and their long-term consequences for Europe's climate remains an open question. We'll continue to watch as new data emerges on these complex environmental shifts.
The headline promises a lot. Let's see what the Top 500 report actually says. On June 23, 2026, the 67th edition of the Top 500 list, announced at the ISC 2026 conference, reveals that China has reclaimed the title of the world's fastest supercomputer, achieving over 2 exaflops. This is a significant milestone in high-performance computing. Wiz, what are your initial thoughts? And for listeners who may not know, what is the ISC?
The ISC, or International Supercomputing Conference, is a major annual event where these powerful machines and their rankings are typically announced. It's a bold claim that Lineshine achieves 2.198 exaflops per second on the HPL benchmark. The implication is raw processing power, but the caveats always hide in the benchmarks themselves.
That's a good distinction. The report notes that Lineshine, a previously unlisted system, debuts at number 1, displacing El Capitan as the world's most powerful supercomputer, as measured by the high-performance LINPACK HPL benchmark. It achieved 2.198 exaflops per second on HPL, about 80% of its 2.736 exaflops theoretical peak, making it the first system on the Top 500 to exceed 2 exaflops of sustained double-precision performance using CPUs only. Wiz, for listeners who may not know, what exactly is HPL in this context?
HPL, or High Performance LINPACK, is a benchmark that measures a supercomputer's floating point computing power, specifically for solving dense linear systems. It's a classic measure of raw arithmetic muscle, though it doesn't represent all real-world workloads.
Lineshine is installed at the National Supercomputing Center in Shenzhen, NSCS, and built by the Shenzhen Cloud Computing Center. It's based on a custom Chinese processor and the Lingkun platform, with 13.79 million cores across 304-core LX2 processors. For listeners, what is the NSCS?
The NSCS is the National Supercomputing Center in Shenzhen, one of China's premier facilities for high-performance computing research and development. The custom Chinese processor and Lingkun platform are key. This isn't off the shelf. It also marks the first time since 2017 that a Chinese system has led the Top 500.
The system draws approximately 42.2 megawatts of power for an efficiency of 52.07 gigaflops per watt. It also takes over the number 1 position on the HPCG ranking with 22.00 HPCG petaflops per second. On the HPL MXP mixed precision benchmark, Lineshine reached 7.92 exaflops per second for 4th place, a comparatively modest 3.6x speed up over its HPL score. Wiz, what is HPCG?
HPCG, or High Performance Conjugate Gradient, is another benchmark that assesses performance on workloads more typical of real-world scientific applications, focusing on memory access patterns. So it's a measure beyond just raw arithmetic speed. But the modest HPL MXP score hints at its specialization towards certain types of problems.
While impressive, the results may say more about Beijing's desire to show self-sufficiency in computing systems than its standing in the global AI race, reports Reuters. Tech and policy experts interviewed by Reuters said that the results do not mean that China has the world's fastest computer for AI work because of changes in the computing industry in recent years and the methods used to compile the list. The report notes that Lineshine ranked 4th on a benchmark test designed to simulate computing work that is more similar to AI.
That's the crux. The fastest label here is highly specific to certain benchmarks. The comparatively modest mixed precision performance suggests it isn't optimized for the low precision operations common in modern AI workloads. So it's a triumph for general purpose supercomputing, not necessarily for the AI frontier.
Jimmy Goodrich, a senior fellow at the University of California's Institute for Global Conflict and Cooperation, observed, if the hyperscalers submitted their systems, this world's fastest would not crack the top 5. For listeners, what is the University of California's Institute for Global Conflict and Cooperation?
It's an academic research institute focused on international security and cooperation, often analyzing the geopolitical implications of technological advancements like this. Goodrich's point about hyperscalers not submitting systems is critical. Many top-tier specialized systems simply aren't on this list, making comparisons tricky.
Addison Snell, CEO of Intersect 350 Research, a firm that focuses on supercomputers, added, "I'm not surprised it's the number one system. What I'm surprised by is that they submitted it and want recognition for it."
Those comments underscore the strategic nature of this announcement. It's less about claiming a definitive lead in all computing and more about signaling domestic capability and independence. The technical achievement is real, but its broader implications for things like cutting-edge AI remain somewhat unclear.
The actual impact of this achievement on global AI capabilities or broader technological leadership remains to be seen, especially given the specialized nature of the benchmarks used. We'll be watching to see how this evolves. Here's the breakdown today. NBC News reported on June 18, 2026, that a new bill on Capitol Hill aims to mandate location tracking for America's most powerful AI chips. This could significantly reshape how advanced AI chips are managed globally, targeting national security concerns. Wiz, for listeners who may not know, can you briefly explain what we mean by Capitol Hill in this context?
Capitol Hill refers to the seat of the U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C., where federal laws are made. It's where this bill would be debated and potentially passed. The idea of tracking AI chips, though, is a direct response to a real challenge in controlling sensitive technology.
Right. A group of companies specializing in tracking international shipments of sensitive technologies is backing this bill. They say the Chip Security Act, or CSA, would increase American chip companies' competitiveness and close key loopholes in the U.S. export control regime. For listeners who might be unfamiliar, what exactly is the CSA?
The CSA, or Chip Security Act, is the legislative proposal itself. It's intended to create a framework for better oversight of where advanced AI chips end up globally. The current controls are clearly insufficient.
The move clashes with claims from semiconductor lobbying groups that the requirements would constrain America's booming chip industry. Sent to congressional leadership Thursday morning and seen by NBC News, the dispatch instead argues that more robust security verification would assure chip customers and manufacturers that they are abiding by sensitive restrictions on chip sales. The companies argue that the boosted confidence will, quote, lead to increased sales, faster export approvals, larger transactions, greater access to new markets, and more expansive chip deals.
That's an interesting tension. The industry often pushes back on new regulations, citing competitive disadvantages. But if the bill genuinely provides a verifiable chain of custody, it could simplify compliance for legitimate sales, which makes the proponent's argument compelling.
Despite U.S. export control laws banning sales of advanced AI chips to certain countries, including China, loopholes in current requirements have allowed billions of dollars worth of America's best AI chips to be sold to entities in third-party countries that can then forward them to China. In just one case in March, the Justice Department charged 3 people with conspiring to forward $2.5 billion of AI chips to China.
The scale of that illicit trade is significant. It highlights how much value there is in circumventing these controls, and how difficult it is to enforce them without more robust tracking. A $2.5 billion charge is no small potatoes.
The CSA aims to address those loopholes, mandating that chip exporters better track where advanced chips are sent, via either bespoke location verification hardware or software that can run on existing hardware. That, bill proponents claim, would ensure that sensitive chips could be sold to countries like Malaysia or Indonesia without fear of further transfer to China.
Location tracking, whether hardware or software-based, is a direct response to that transshipment problem. It's an attempt to close the barn door more securely. The real question is how effectively such systems can be implemented and maintained at scale.
The long-term effectiveness of this approach remains uncertain. We'll be watching how this develops on Capitol Hill. All right, that's our board for today. We started by looking at ambitious nuclear energy plans in both Canada and the United States, each with their own geopolitical and financial uncertainties, especially given past challenges. Then we shifted to Europe, grappling with its status as the world's fastest warming continent and the complex interplay of environmental factors at play. Finally, we tracked global technological shifts, from China reclaiming the fastest supercomputer to the proposed US bill mandating AI chip location tracking. These are all developing stories with significant implications for technology, geopolitics, and our climate. We've got more tunnel signal queued up for our next session. Keep your skepticism calibrated, and we'll pick up these threads as new information emerges in the episodes ahead.
It's certainly a lot to consider. If we missed an angle, or you have further questions on these topics, please drop us a comment. We read them down here in the tunnel. And if this signal helped you stay informed, a like or subscribe keeps the pipes humming. More surface news and deeper dives are coming through the grate soon. Until then, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time on the Low Band Show.